Hello, and welcome to the Market Bull Podcast. Please note, topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial or investment advice. Today on the show, I spoke with Joe Lowry, also known as Mr. Lithium. Joe is the founder of Global Lithium LLC, which provides lithium advisory services for companies and governments across the world. Joe has been involved in the lithium industry for 3 decades and has worked in the US, China, and Japan, and worked with a whole host of other countries. He is also the host of the Global Lithium Podcast, which is streaming on all major platforms. Joe started the podcast by discussing his history and how he got involved in the lithium industry. He then went on to break down what lithium is and the current demand-supply picture. We then talked about the Chinese lithium spot price and what influences its movements given the start of 2023. Joe also dispelled some of the negative news headlines that lithium has attracted to start this year and how the numbers truly don't add up when you look at them. Joe then looked at where the focus for lithium should be and what excites him most about certain jurisdictions. There is a lot of content covered in this episode, and I hope you enjoy listening. So hello and welcome to the Market Bull Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Kostrich, and joining me today, I'm very excited to be honest, I've got Joe Lowry. Mr. Lithium really is how he goes by. He's the founder of Global Lithium LLC, which is an advisory group, and he also hosts the Global Lithium Podcast, which I can say when I started podcasting, it was one of the ones I emerged driving down south in WA. So welcome to the show, Joe.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, when I reached out to you and I said I followed your work for a while, you really are Mr. Lithium. You've sort of inherited that nickname or identity as the man to go to for lithium talk and insights. And I mean, before you became this man that everyone goes to understand what's going on in the market, how did you initially get involved in the mining industry, given that you're based and worked all over the world?
Well, that's an interesting way to phrase the question because I don't view the lithium world as mining. I view it as a chemical business that may or may not have a mining component. Now, you sitting in WA, of course, you're going to consider it mining because
Yep.
Western Australia is the best place in the world to mine lithium. But given the breadth of how lithium is obtained, uh, I wouldn't call it mining. So with that preamble,
Mm.
I was always interested in extractive industries. I started out after graduate school in the oil business, and I spent 5 years there. The company I worked for was broken up, sold off in pieces, and I answered a recruiter's call and went to FMC Corporation's gold mining operation in Nevada. So I went from oil to gold, but the way they constructed career path, they wanted you to go to multiple locations. And I only spent like 18 months and worked on acquisitions for the gold company. And then I didn't want to go back into a corporate type job that I'd had in oil. So I looked at the lithium opportunity they had in North Carolina. Loved the state of North Carolina. Went there, and once I got there, I was in finance. I was not in the commercial side. So I constructed a plot to get out of bean counting and into the commercial side, which happily worked out. And then just by happenstance, I was managing the 2 product lines that were selected by the people that started the lithium ion battery business in Japan. Our product was selected, and it was a very small field back then. The lithium world was really two companies, both based in small towns in North Carolina operationally, and it went from there. I started going to Japan every 6 weeks from 95 to 2000, and in 2000 they just said, why don't you just move over there? And my wife and my kids were game, so we spent 11 years in Asia. And that's why I got to know all the people, whether it was in the battery industry, the cathode space, or when I lived in China, I knew all the Chinese operators. So it gave me a good grounding for when I left FMC. lithium was starting to take off more in the concept of EVs was out there. So I jumped on that and have benefited. But one other point is I didn't call myself Mr. Lithium.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
That my arrogance does not extend to that kind of self-proclamation. And I've benefited from that name being tagged on me, but there are a lot of people who have done a lot more for the industry than I have. So I do not claim that title.
No, that's fine. It's a common thing. You never really give yourself a nickname. It's sort of thrust upon you. I get that. And I mean, you've been in it for 3 decades, realistically. I mean, there's been so many changes within lithium and developments and research and even the adoption and acceptance of it. I mean, what have you seen really transform over the time? And looking at the cycles that it's had, the ups and downs, the hype, the noise, the projects that have come and gone, the time in the market. I mean, what's been the round out sort of view over this past, 3-decade journey?
It's really an ironic twist now with everybody talking about lithium because when I started, I would get on a plane out of Charlotte. Somebody'd ask me what I do. I'd say lithium. Their eyes would glaze over. If they didn't have a manic depressive relative, they had no idea what I was talking about. Lithium just wasn't known. There used to be a TV commercial about, I think it was BASF, and, they just make things better. They didn't, we weren't selling anything that was a branded product. We were a process additive. We were used in making glass, you can't make a statin anti-cholesterol without lithium chemistry. The thing that fascinated me about the industry is exactly what it's not today, because there were so many different businesses that I got to sell to. I got to learn about dyes. I got to learn about aluminum, glass, later battery. When I started, the lithium ion battery did not exist.
Mm,
That's how far back I go. So it was the diversity of the product lines and the applications that attracted me. And as we move forward, this industry is 100% really now driven by battery. So
100%.
in some ways, the success of that aspect in what's making lithium a big thing now is making it would have made it less interesting for the 30-year-old me.
Yeah, it's really transcended now, and it's, as you said, it's almost, you could say it's a bit bland. No, I shouldn't say that, but it's lost a lot of the flavor. But as we know, the ever emerging demand for EVs has painted the perfect picture for lithium. Uh, but as you said before, I mean, I have my bias being in Perth, Western Australia. All we do is mine. So whenever we talk about lithium, it's always related to digging stuff out of the ground and looking at it. But you said before, it's best way to describe it is a chemical. And when you're breaking down lithium, for people that are unfamiliar with the terminologies and even, I look at hard rock versus brine versus clay and all the differences and all the words. I mean, how do you break down lithium and even how it's really emerging now?
It's really interesting. It depends on the personality of the person you're talking to and how curious they are. And I'm happy to get granular with people, explain, lithium's never found, pure lithium's not found in nature. You have to extract it and purify it. It's The reason lithium is used in batteries is because of how reactive it is. And that's a blessing and a curse. It's great for the battery, and people always have complained about battery life, but just think about, well, you're a young guy, so maybe when you were 12, how long your battery lasted,
Yeah.
and how long it lasts now with all the extra burdens that are put on it. And before smartphones, even flip phones the batteries didn't last that long. But it's evolving and emerging. But people always ask me, well, when's lithium going to be replaced? And I said, I won't be alive. I won't be on this side of the ground when that happens, just because unless the periodic table changes, there'll be a lot of improvements made going forward. But if you look at, except for what people like to talk about, sodium ion, whether you're talking about solid state or different technology changes, they're all lithium based. So lithium's going to continue to have a great future. And I think I've kind of gone off on a tangent from your original question. But the way I explain lithium is just it's a very reactive element. And that's what makes it what it is. People tend not to be that curious about the details. You're living in a part of the world where you're used to mining, you're
Yeah.
used to there's a lot of people in the United States that think you get lithium at the hardware store. I mean, it's just for your audience, I've been to most of the mines in Western Australia. I've seen the super pit. I love that aspect because that's when people look at lithium, hard rock was the original lithium. The first lithium used in batteries was hard rock from North Carolina. And we knew about Greenbushes, but Greenbushes really wasn't at that time. Greenbushes lithium wasn't, part of the battery equation. It changed rapidly, but there was a decade from about the time I started selling to the Japanese until I lived in China when it was all brine
Mm.
because brine was lower cost and the Western technology to make the other chemical that's used in batteries, lithium hydroxide, we used a carbonate to hydroxide process, and that all flipped, and it really flipped due to the emergence of all the mines in WA
Mm.
and the huge increase in conversion capacity built in China. And now you've got the next generation, which you're seeing in Kwinana and Kemerton and the building of conversion facilities in Australia, even with the cost blowouts, that's still going to happen. You
Yeah.
got guys that have been attracted, like a guy like Chris Ellison, who didn't care about lithium a long time ago and then wound up being the builder of Mount Marion and then seeing the opportunity and seizing the moment. And now just he's out negotiated Albemarle multiple times. He's out negotiated Gangfen. Uh, and ironically, he's one of the only major figures in this industry that I've never met.
Interesting.
I know the guys who started Tanchi, or the guy who started Tanchi. I know the guys who started Gangfen. I know the American players. I know the South American players, but I've been by his office.
Well, if he's listening,
But
hopefully he picks up on that, and then you can
I,
organize a meet next
I
time.
well, I mean, I think I've been told that Mr. Ellison wasn't pleased with some comments I made about DSO back in the day, and and he's want to hold a grudge. I wouldn't. I was actually surprised that he even knew what my name was, but I know somebody who met him within the last several months who said, yeah, he knows he's not happy with your 2016 DSO comments, and actually at the time I said what he did was brilliant but what the Chinese did was stupid because at the time they didn't have the capacity to beneficiate the ore. They just had a bunch of entrepreneurs that thought, well, we'll get the lithium values over here and we'll figure it out. And
Mm.
ultimately, the Chinese do figure it out. But what happens now is much different than even the scenario in 2016 when we had the first big lithium boom that fizzled before the EV business really took traction.
Well, exactly, because I remember seeing the 2016 lithium rise, and then naturally it just disappeared, and almost all of a sudden overnight, well, I shouldn't say overnight, but the lithium excitement flooded back in early sort of 2021, at least from my initial reading, or 2020, and it sort of had its ups and downs, and now it's spiraled. But I mean, a comment that I wanted to raise with you, and it's that the whole idea of the lithium spot price and compare it with the Chinese spot price. I mean, what are your opinions on that? And I mean, going forward, I've heard you talk about WA as the main well, not producer yet, but we've got a lot of infrastructure going up. We haven't necessarily built all the refining and all the other aspects down the line. But do you ever see a shift away from that potential pegging price in China?
Well, this is the interesting thing about the narrative on lithium. What you read in the paper is usually wrong.
Mm,
And I would say, especially the international press, if you're, people that are writing from Europe or writing, I mean, it's it's just a hard industry to understand. It was always tiny, opaque. There were very few people that really got it. There was no published accurate price on lithium. And the most important price, and this is something that your audience may understand it, but the spodumene price from WA to China is the most important lithium price. It's not the price of lithium battery quality, carbonate and hydroxide, because the spodumene price sets the cost curve. Because there is a lot of independent conversion capacity in China. And if they're paying 5,000 a ton or 4,000 a ton, take the ratio in rough terms, it takes 8 units of spodumene to make a unit of lithium chemical. That's not stoichiometry, but that's a rough number that's
mm,
viable as a rough first cut. And then you have to add the conversion cost. So if you're shipping out from WA at 5,000, and that's just for ease of calculation, multiply that by 8, your base cost of lithium values for a converter is 40,000 out of the gate, costs you another 4,000 and change to convert it to a battery quality chemical. Their cash cost is in the 40s.
mm.
And the price of lithium is not going to go to 20 as long as the spodumene price stays at a level. Now, if we go back to the 2020 you earlier referenced when this all
Yeah.
started, I had Ken Brinsden on my podcast in the middle of 2020 in the very darkest days, right before things turned up. And they were selling for 400 US or a little less than that. They couldn't make money at that price. It was a dark time. A year later, almost to the day, I had Dale Henderson on the podcast. It was, I dropped the podcast the same day they did the first BMX auction. And it's just been a run since then. And it's all the banks like to say, well, this is, high prices fix high prices. This is just going to happen again. The price will run up, then it's going to drop. What's different? Well, what's different is in 2016, you had global EV penetration barely at 1%.
Yep.
And now you've got the EU, North America making all these proclamations, all the legacy car companies saying we're going to electrify by such and such date. It's happening.
Yeah.
And the lithium industry is not prepared for it, largely because after the mines came on in Pilbara, Altura, Alita, Mount Marion, all those mines came on, the conventional wisdom of the analysts was, well, that'll just happen next time too. There'll be like 10 more mines come on. Well, all those mines were already in process before the first spike happened. That was a serendipitous situation that isn't repeating itself. Look at what's happened since we've had this now pushing 3-year run. How many new mines have come on in WA? That's the question to ask. Now,
Mm.
they've had restarts because you had shut-in capacity. Altura is now part of Pilbara. Wogen is back on. But you don't have, it's going to be a while before Liontown's up. It's going to be a while before West Farmers and SQM get their operation going. Uh, so this is a much different scenario this time. And the obsession with the China spot price, it's just an easy number. And the Chinese manipulated it last year.
Yes. Yep.
And that it was a huge manipulation, but I called that right as it was starting to happen. And the real irony is that one of the main players in getting the price down, CATL, then realized it was actually bad for them. And once price went low enough and their whole epitolite new lepidolite empire was starting to collapse around them, they wanted the price to come up, but they wanted to control it within ranges, and that's the problem with markets.
Yeah.
And
Always
I
the
said this, and some other commentators like Daniel Jimenez, who's a friend of mine who worked for SQM for a number of years and does kind of what I do. We both agree that the spike could be higher on this round,
mm,
but you're gonna have and just look at what you're doing in Western Australia. From 2016, in January of 2016, you had one operating lithium mine. That was Greenbushes. Mount Catlin restarted later that year. Then in the subsequent years, you had the other mines I've already mentioned come online. China was the only game in town. China was buying virtually all of it. There's a few industrial uses other than battery that are in different places, but over 95% of your spodumene was going to China. That's all going to change. Look at Tesla just started building a converter in Texas last week. They broke ground. You have people in Europe based on the EV movement there that want to build conversion capacity. So now the world's coming to Australia's door, and you're making chemicals yourself. So that's put tremendous pressure on China. That's why they're spending so much money in South America for brine and in Africa for ore or mines. It's a new world order.
Agreed. The transition and the different timing, it's always about, you hear it from all the experts. It's not just in lithium, but timing the market or time in the market. And the whole idea that, yeah, these projects, these mines can just come online, the snap of your finger. And I always look back to how the EV, yeah, the transition, it suddenly went from they weren't anywhere to suddenly, even in Australia now, I saw an article written that, 1 in 5 are electric vehicles now. And I mean, Australia is a relatively small market, and we're typically behind global trends, either in Europe or the US in particular. But there is a huge transition required, and all these projects that are sitting there. I mean, I look at naturally Australia and West Australia as a good spot for lithium, but you can see South America as well. They've got a lot going on there, and there's probably a whole other podcast with the the talks about in Chile as well. But from your point of view, clearly there is a supply demand real problem emerging over the coming years. And given that it takes so long to get these projects online, why do lithium projects always take so long to get up and running? And will we ever optimize them and get them to come online faster?
Well, and I think it's hard for Western Australia to appreciate the problems the rest of the world have, because Western Australia has been very successful. I went up to Port Hedland and then visited Altura and Pilbara the same day, and it was January of uh, 18, and there wasn't much at Pilbara. And
Mm,
Dale Henderson took me around, and they were producing by the end of the year. They weren't in full commercial production, but that happened very fast. And I had Ken on the podcast that fall and talked about it. If you look at a brine project, if you look at Kachari, that's just about to start up, Gangfin and Lithium Americas JV, that's taken years to build. And yet, yeah, COVID had some impact, but it's just vertically integrated projects in tough jurisdictions. You're at 4,000 meters in the Andes. Logistics are tough. The governments aren't always great about customs clearance for capital equipment. In you're some of those countries, Argentina. I love Argentina, but economically, it's been a mess for ever since I've been going there. And the politics go right, then they go left. And there's companies that for them it's a no-go zone because the way the economy works, it's a cash trap. It's hard to get your money out once you start producing and are profitable. So WA's been great about the mining and the beneficiation part of this. Now, but look at the struggle they've had. Look at Kwinana. If you go on YouTube, you can see the original video about when Kwinana was supposed to start, and I think it's like 4 years late now. and Kemerton's been late. Chris Ellison was very critical of Albemarle for the capital screw ups there. So Western Australia is learning now what the rest of the world's problem is the chemical part of this is much more difficult
Yeah.
than the digging it out of the ground part. And that's what the big argument is now, because Elon Musk loves to say that, oh, it's the refining, it's tough. Well, if you don't have raw material to refine, refining doesn't really matter either. And you've seen the flip when there was a brief oversupply, when all these mines came on in WA and the price went into the 300s. China called the tune. China was the only game in town. They could force these guys basically down to break even economics to get the material. But look what happens with I can't remember who called it the revenge of the miners first. Maybe it was Ken. But that's really happened. And Chris Ellison was quoted, I think, in the AFR first, saying, the guy with the rock wins. Well, it isn't just rock. It's the guy with the rock or the brine or the clay wins. And I think you're going to see that well into the 2030s, because no matter what people say to themselves about the circular economy and recycling isn't going to be a significant part of supply. In the next 10 years, the biggest service recycling is going to provide is processing all the scrap. All these new gigafactories that start up have 30-40% rejects for months. That's kind of the dirty little secret of the battery industry.
Jeez, okay.
And that's just, if you're already short of lithium and you're having that much scrap is just lithium deferred to market. So there is a need and there's a benefit to having recycling, but it's not the circular economy. The circular economy can't happen until there's been EVs out there long enough, and enough of them that have gone through a 8 or 10-year life. And some of those batteries will go to energy storage as well. So it's going to be a really long time. In Chris Reed, who I have a lot of respect for, who runs Neo Metals, he said on the podcast last year that in 2030, recycling would still be a very small, probably single digit to 10% of the supply. So all these people will think mining's going away because this is just going to become a virtuous circle. It's a nice thought.
Yeah.
It's just not a practical reality.
Yeah. Well, the reality is the key part. And we've seen, you could say, I've always said the idea of mining and necessarily where the world is going with the environmental sustainable and friendly, everyone's like, well, at the end of the day, we need these materials, and anything and everything we use in everyday life has been a product of some form of mining. And the reality is kicking in that, there's a lot of better structures in place for getting these projects up and running across the world. But we actually need to get back in the ground and start setting it up. But a point you touched on before, which I wanted to dive in a bit deeper on, was about the education and the news flow. Because I know personally, scouring the media and even just following key figures, it does get quite overwhelming trying to find, how would you say, the correct information. I mean, from your perspective, I mean, how do you decipher all this news? I mean, you've got a lot of experience and expertise, so I can imagine you can sniff out the falsities pretty quickly. But for a lot of people, you just see a headline or you see any sort of news and you take it with not even with a pinch of salt. But where do you source this valuable information, and what are some of the good areas to go and look at or follow, for example?
If you read The Economist, or you read the Financial Times, or you read any of major news outlets, Reuters, Bloomberg, they have said lithium prices crashed. The average price paid for lithium in 2023 will be higher than the average price paid in 2022. That's the key point, and that's what's missed in this BS narrative that,
Yeah.
oh, the spot price is down. How much volume was moving at those spot prices? Not very much. If you look at the import statistics of Korea and Japan in the first quarter of this year, you will find, and this is all, this is lithium moving into those two countries who don't produce any themselves, from whether it's Chile or Argentina or China. The prices started out the year depending on the product and depending on the month, between $65 and $80. While you're listening or reading, the China spot price is now down to, what,
Yeah.
140,000 RMB or whatever the floor was. And those numbers, and we've had an Australian company with Argentina operations and Australian Allchem was just, merging with Livent. Look at their first quarter price. And they don't make a great carbonate product. Their carbonate product is not mostly battery grade. They were over $50 in Q1. Well, what we call Q1 in this side. You guys
Yeah, we call it something else.
do that from January to March. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
SQM will announce on Thursday. We'll see what that price was. But looking at the import statistics from 2022 and comparing them with that, and you have to know how to read them because there are some intercompany things, and price is going to be higher this year because the contracts are resetting. And as I said earlier, the most important price to watch. Why didn't the spodumene price crash? If there really was a systemic oversupply, not a manipulated situation, and this is the other thing about the battery supply chain. Lithium can be inventoried in cells. It can be inventoried as cathode. And there were mismatches. There was too much cathode manufactured in China last year. So they did have inventory and they did stop buying for a while. And that's why the short-term price went down. But that's a blip. That wasn't a trend. Unfortunately, the big banks, the Goldmans, the Morgan Stanleys, I actually think the Aussie-centric investment banks are better at this than some of the more global names. But Morgan Stanley, in this, I say this often, and I always like to say it. I mean, they are, it's incongruous. They have a 500,000 ton shortage projected for 2030, but they have lithium prices going down below 10,000 a ton. The math doesn't work. They have spodumene at 1,100. Even if it was 1,100, the chemical price couldn't be below 10,000. It makes no sense. And all we're seeing are higher capital costs, higher OpEx, and a lot of these, the marginal projects that get built now, there isn't another Greenbushes in a good jurisdiction. You may have things in the Congo or, I'm not going to get into all the names because I'll get hate mail. But we've been hearing, well, I'll say it. I mean, we've been hearing about AVZ for 7 years. Where's the product? Where's the road to the port? So going forward, lithium demand is going to grow 10x in this decade. Supply's not.
So then going from there, then what are the most exciting areas or jurisdictions? Again, me being in WA, I get to have a bit of a biased hat on, but I mean, even seeing North America and US and Canada, they're really starting to get more projects. And I mean, even me coming into it, for a few years, at least I'm seeing more news and more projects coming out of there. But what jurisdictions and areas really excite you, or do you think you're really going to take the lead? Or, I mean, naturally, I don't think anyone's really going to start overtaking WA or Australia anytime soon, but where else excites you?
Well, here's the issue. And this is something I asked 4 CEOs of operating WA lithium producers this question in the last few months. What is peak WA production in lithium carbonate equivalents? And the highest answer I've gotten is 1.5 million tons of LCE. And that's, to frame it, this year you'll do somewhere 400,000-ish, 500,000. This is an LCE equivalent. So take your spodumene imports and divide it by 8 to get the LCE. If the world's going to need, if Albemarle's right, the demand's 3.7 million tons in 2030. We're at less than 1 million tons of supply right now. And if WA can only do 1.5,
and there's a lot more from elsewhere.
Well, and look at what you're seeing now. The problem take Canada, and I call Canada the Australia of North America. A lot of hard rock there. Not, nobody's got green bushes, but Quebec and Ontario have a lot of reasonable hard rock assets. You got Aussies that are now Ken Brins is now with Patriot as executive chairman. I like that team. You've got John Young and Cam Henry, Green Technology Metals. You got Chris Evans out there. You got my buddy Alex Cheeseman. The Aussies hopefully will help Canada get it right, because Canada's can't get out of their own way in terms of project execution. But they have the rock, and you also have Livent in trying to do Wabuchi, but Wabuchi's been out there for 15 years, has never produced. Finally, Sayona is now operating as of the last several weeks, but that's a mediocre asset that's run before. I advised the bankruptcy court when it went under, when RB Energy had it. We need to see Canada get much better at permitting and getting out of the way and letting people who know how to mine get stuff done. The United States is the same thing. My backyard, I mean, two of the first lithium mines in the world are within an hour of where I'm sitting right now. But can you permit a new one? Piedmont Lithium's been trying since 2016. I believe Albemarle will get Kings Mountain restarted sometime in this decade, but they've approached it in the right way. You've got Thacker Pass that's now started construction, sedimentary, aka clay asset. But here's the thing: Thacker Pass Phase 1 is enough lithium for one big gigafactory. If you look at the map of planned gigafactories in North America, there's a lot of names on that list. Thacker Pass can do a 50 gigawatt hour gigafactory. Phase 1 of Thacker Pass is wiped out by one of those. So there's just not enough energy yet. And look at the IRA and some of the other incentive programs in the United States. It's all focused downstream or conversion. If you don't have the rock, as Chris Ellison says, there's nothing to convert. And that's really the issue that's going to play out over the next decade. That's why this is not investing advice.
But naturally.
there's a lot of good lithium plays out there. And anybody that's in the lower quartile of the cost curve that gets into production is going to make a lot of money. Look at Pilbara gone from rags to riches.
Yeah.
And if you just look at scenarios at the beginning of COVID, when all these stocks were in the toilet, I bought Pilbara, I bought Neometals, I bought the U.S. lithium companies, I bought more SQM. It was just a huge opportunity. Those opportunities are still going to pop up.
Yeah.
If you look at the relative valuations of some of these companies, they're not that high compared to the opportunity. And I met the chairman of Liontown in Florida in March, and I had Tony Ottaviano on the podcast, but I hadn't met Mr. Goiter. And I just loved it when he rejected the Albemarle offer.
Well, it's still going on, isn't it? It hasn't really been resolved.
I mean, and I look forward to being in WA later in the year and getting to see Kathleen Valley. He was kind enough to extend an invitation that I intend to
take up.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, closing out, clearly you've well educated, you know your stuff in lithium, but when you're breaking it down, I mean, where does the focus need to be in the next 10 years? Do you see it in the exploration side, in converting these to mines? Is it the extraction, the processing, and the refining? I mean, where do you see, you could really say all of them, but where do you see the primary focus needing to be sent for lithium?
I would say project execution. The problem, one of the big problems of the lithium industry is you don't have that many people that have done it before. So people are having to relearn lessons that experience would have taught them if they had it. And if you just look at the number of projects that you have going on in Australia right now and how late they are. So there are enough lithium assets that are known and are at some stage of development, making sure the good ones are financed and getting the government out of the way in terms of, I just think you're in, probably the best jurisdiction. So it may be hard for you to see some of the problems, but if you, you just look at Argentina, look at all the projects in Argentina. And Argentina right now should be producing a lot more lithium than it is. And hopefully that happens. But the problem becomes when lithium starts to be viewed as the golden goose. And look at what we just saw in Chile. Chile's got a lot of lithium assets besides the Atacama. And in order to get the capital there, I think what's happening right now is when uncertainty is brought into the equation, what you're going to have happen, the Chinese will invest. They'll invest when it's uncertain. They'll invest ahead of the curve. That's why they have the position that they have now, because they invested while Western companies sat on their hands and didn't like the NPVs or didn't like the risk profiles. And that's with the geopolitics we have right now, that's a big issue. But execution of existing projects, I mean, you have to keep exploring, but there's plenty known lithium out there that needs to come to market. So
Yeah.
I would say it's project execution.
Yeah, I as I said, I'm learning all about this, and this has been an incredible insight. As I said, Mr. Lithium, the nickname that you've been handed and fostered. But I mean, I can happily say I've learned a lot, and I know you have the Global Lithium podcast. You've done, said beforehand, 160 episodes, and you cover almost everything across the globe, and it's a fantastic resource. But for people that want to follow you and learn more about Joe Lowry, where can they go, and how can they contact you as well?
Well, my website's globallithium.net. There's a contact form there. The podcast is on all the major platforms. I'm on Twitter at Global Lithium. I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm not hard to find.
You're everywhere.
You can Google me. Yeah, I mean, I'll pop up.
Well, thank you so much, Joe, for taking the time to speak with me on the show. And yeah, hopefully when you come to WA, sunny WA, by then, we can catch up and get you back on to discuss the movements and the trends. But yeah, thank you for taking the time to speak on the show today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow the Market Bull on our socials at Twitter and LinkedIn by searching The Market Bull. You can also subscribe to our newsletter on the website by visiting www.themarketbull.com.au.